Okay, let's dive into this. We are living through an absolutely unprecedented moment in human history. Right now, there are four massive paradigm shifts simultaneously rewiring the fundamental structures of our society. We are witnessing changes that are literally going to redefine how we live, work, and interact with the entire world around us.
In today's explainer, we're mapping out this rewiring. We'll be looking at the fading dominance of the US dollar, the AGI labor crisis, the massive race for fusion energy, and finally, the dawn of human augmentation. So let's just get right into it. Section 1. Fading US dollar dominance and the cracks forming in our financial bedrock.
Global finance is, without a doubt, the macroeconomic bedrock of the modern world. But take a look at this massive number, $29 trillion. Researchers over at the Hoover Institution actually calculated the value of what's known as the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar. See, because the entire world constantly demands dollar-safe assets, investors are totally willing to accept lower yields just for the convenience and security of holding them. The present value of that global trust? Roughly $29 trillion. That is a staggering amount of national wealth tied directly to international confidence.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this global trust is reacting under pressure today compared to the past. Historically, when global panic sets in, meaning the VIX volatility index spikes, the dollar appreciates in this classic flight to safety. But post-tariff shock, researchers have observed a completely bizarre inversion. The VIX spiked, but the dollar actually depreciated. Even crazier, the usual premium spread on U.S. Treasuries inverted into negative territory. And at the exact same time, the one-year Treasury credit default swap, which basically measures the cost to insure against a U.S. default, jumped from 16 all the way up to 52 basis points. The data is practically screaming that market behaviors are shifting way away from traditional norms. So what happens if world demand for these dollar-safe assets just completely vanishes? Well, according to macroeconomic models, the result is kind of lopsided. The real exchange rate of the dollar would actually suffer a surprisingly modest depreciation, only about 7.6%. But the real impact? That hits the domestic bond market. U.S. interest rates would have to spike by 92 basis points just to absorb the loss of foreign demand. That is a massive structural shock to borrowing costs that would ripple through the entire economy, affecting everything from corporate debt all the way down to your personal mortgage. Which brings us to Section 2, the AGI labor crisis, and how we are redefining human work. If our global financial systems are shifting, what happens to the very way we earn our money and participate in the economy? Well, according to research out of Newcastle University, we have to fundamentally reframe how we look at artificial general intelligence. We need to stop thinking of AGI as just some super smart coworker. AGI acts strictly as capital. It's a deployable asset operating at a near zero marginal cost. In the classic Cobb-Douglas production function, output relies on human labor and capital machinery. But AGI alters this equation entirely because it has the capability to replace both cognitive and physical labor. It isn't just assisting us, it's functionally replacing the human labor variable, which shifts total economic power directly into the hands of the people who own the AGI. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what that shift looks like. Mathematical modeling by Pascal Stiefenhofer shows that as the share of AGI labor increases, the value of human wages doesn't just slowly decline. No, it exponentially approaches zero. As AGI transitions from a tool that complements us to one that straight up substitutes us, human employment simply becomes economically unviable in a competitive market. This dynamic points to a terrifying macroeconomic crisis, something researchers refer to as a Keynesian paradox. Imagine a scenario where AGI-driven firms can produce practically infinite goods and services at incredibly low costs. But at the same time, because human wages have totally collapsed to zero, the population has absolutely no income to buy any of it. Unchecked, this leads to a complete deterioration of aggregate demand. You're left with infinite production, but absolutely zero purchasing power. To prevent a total market failure like that, economists are actively exploring several mechanisms for a post-labor economy. These include things like universal basic income to guarantee consumer spending, models of public or cooperative AGI ownership so those profits are shared more broadly, or even progressive AGI capital taxation to sustain aggregate demand. And look, regardless of which specific policy path gets debated, the mathematical models are super clear. The current wage-based system simply cannot hold without some major intervention. All right, on to Section 3, the fusion energy race and fueling the future.
So if AGI provides infinite labor, how on earth do we power the vast data centers and immense physical infrastructure required to run it all? The answer might just be the holy grail of power generation. Check out this massive figure reported by ID TechX, over $9 billion in private fusion investment. Governments and private entities are no longer treating commercial fusion like some distant sci-fi dream. They're treating it as the modern-day space race, literally pouring billions of dollars into startups that are aggressively racing to, basically, bottle a star.
Why this sudden, massive push right now? Well, it's driven by a triad of forces. First, we're finally seeing actual, measurable science breakthroughs in plasma physics. Second, there is an absolutely insatiable global demand for continuous, zero-carbon, green energy. And third, tech maturation. The highly specialized components you need to build these complex machines, things like high-temperature superconductors and short-pulse lasers, have finally matured enough to actually push these fusion reactor designs into reality.
Currently, scientists are actively pursuing two dominant methods to make this happen. On one side, you have magnetic confinement. This wrestles a fusion plasma into shape using incredibly powerful superconducting magnets. This is exactly what you see in those giant, donut-shaped tokamak reactors. On the flip side is inertial confinement, which blasts microscopic fuel capsules with unbelievably powerful pulsed lasers to trigger the fusion reaction. Let's move to and see how this builds. There's been this old running joke in the scientific community that fusion is always 30 years away. Well, you can officially consider that joke dead. In 2022, the National Ignition Facility hit a historic energy gain milestone. By 2025, private funding rocketed past that $9 billion mark. And now, the target for the very first commercial grid power from leading startups is officially set for 2035. The timeline is accelerating at an absolutely breathtaking pace. Which takes us to our final section, Section 4, the dawn of human augmentation and rewiring ourselves. We've talked a lot about rewriting our external infrastructure, stuff like global finance, labor, and energy generation. But the most intimate frontier of all is happening within our own biology. It's incredibly visceral, and it perfectly encapsulates our impending reality. A world where the physical and cognitive limits of the human body can be fundamentally upgraded and altered. And hey, if you think this is purely speculative, consider exactly where this quote comes from. Human augmentation, the dawn of a new paradigm. That is not a line from some tech billionaire's late-night manifesto. This is the actual title of a strategic implications project, authored jointly by the UK Ministry of Defense and the German Bundeswehr. Top global military planning offices are actively mapping out right now how human augmentation is going to change society, security, and what it fundamentally means to be human. So the crucial point is, when you combine these four pillars, a shifting financial bedrock, the total replacement of human labor, limitless fusion energy, and physical augmentation, the old rules of society simply no longer apply. Researchers point back to philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his concept of the social contract. That contract was built for a world of wage labor, scarce energy, and strict biological limitations, and all of those constraints are currently being shattered. Our societal rules have to adapt to these technological leaps, or they literally face the risk of total collapse. Which leaves us staring down the ultimate question. As AGI, fusion, and augmentation completely rewrite the foundational rules of humanity, are we ready for a new social contract? It's a reality that's approaching much, much faster than we think, and it's something every single one of us needs to be preparing for. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this sparks your curiosity to dig even deeper into these incredible world-altering shifts. Okay,